Hi everybody, this is Joe from PrepAgent. Today I want to talk to you about some tips and tricks to help you guys pass the real estate exam based upon my years and years of experience helping people prepare for this exam, pass, so they can get their real estate license and begin an awesome career in real estate. So I took down some notes I want to share with you guys, so let's begin. By the way, I don't know if tricks is the best word. How about techniques or things you want to keep in mind? Regardless. First thing I want to share with you guys is that this is basically a glorified vocabulary quiz. I don't want you guys to get overwhelmed with all the legalities of it. Don't worry, you're not in law school and you're not passing the bar exam here. It's your real estate exam. And I want you guys to make it less intimidating by keeping in mind that if you memorize your vocabulary, you are basically like 3/4 of the way there. I mean, you still got to put that vocabulary in context, and there's still some word problems you got to take on, but it all begins and ends with the vocabulary. You should memorize vocabulary when you start, and it's probably the last thing you should review the night before your exam. So, first take that in mind, that this is a glorified vocabulary quiz. Just like if you were studying a different language, this is a different language. It's like legalese. You would start to memorize words if you were studying a different language. For example, the first thing you learn if you're learning Spanish is comer, is eat. Therefore, when you hear the word comer in a sentence, you may not know the whole sentence, but you know they're talking about eating food. And it's a place to start. But if you don't know that word, then the rest of the sentence is just going to be really confusing. But if you understand the key words and you understand what those key words mean, those bigger phrases will be a lot easier to decipher, and those word problems will be less intimidating. And a lot of the questions won't even be word problems. Some of it will be straight up vocabulary definition. Okay, so that's my first tip. Approach it as a vocabulary quiz. My second tip is about time when you study. Now, this doesn't apply to everybody, but the majority of people who are studying for their real estate exam have a life. They got kids, sometimes a job in the meantime. They have obligations during the day, and the day gets away from them. So you need to set aside time in the morning and in the evening before you go to bed. But what you do with that time, I have suggestions for two different things. Okay? First thing is in the morning. I want you to memorize 5 words. Frankly, I prefer 10. I want you to learn 10 words a day, but it really depends on how much time you have and your schedule and what things are going on. 10 vocabulary words in the morning. In the morning, your mind is a little fresher. It's easier to remember stuff. You memorize it, and if that day gets away from you, well, then you got it done. But it's really important, first thing in the morning, you will remember these words better if you take it on first thing in the morning. If you try and do it at night, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to look at it, you're going to stare at it, and you're probably going to fall asleep. If I'm being honest here, if you can't sleep, the best thing you could probably do is look at these vocabulary words. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I can't sleep, open up your real estate textbook, you'll be out in 2 seconds. Okay, so trying to memorize it at night is probably not the best idea. But what can you do at night? Well, at night, you probably have a little more peace and quiet and tranquility where you could organize which words you want to learn in the next morning. So my tip is in the evening, that's the time where you're not doing a lot of thinking, but you're doing a lot of organizing. You're looking at everything, you're seeing which words I want to take on the next morning, what do I know, what do I not know. It's not the time for learning, it's the time for organizing. In the morning you wake up, you're not wasting time filtering through papers, saying, okay, what should I learn, what should I go over? In the morning, you're ready to memorize. That's my next tip, it's really important. In the evening, you're organizing the information when everything's quiet. In the morning, you're trying to make it sink into the old noggin, okay? That's when you do that. You do not want to spend time in the morning filtering through papers because that's not learning, that's organizing. They're two different things, okay? The morning is when you want everything to sink in. Oops. So that's my next tip. So the difference between what you do in the morning and the evening. And if the day gets away from you, gets chaotic, so be it. 10 words a day, everybody. That's what you got to do. Okay, my next tip for you guys. A lot of people think to themselves, well, the real estate exam is a bunch of questions with some options, so I'm just going to do a lot of questions with some multiple choice options. Makes sense. If I want to become a better runner, I should run. If I want to become a better shooter in basketball, I should take a basketball and just keep shooting. Not the case here. And by the way, I'm not a basketball pro, so if that advice is horrible, I apologize. but you get the idea. You should not jump into any questions until you have vocabulary memorized. I cannot say this enough. Do not do the questions until you have vocabulary memorized. I don't care if the exam is multiple choice with questions. You don't just automatically do those questions. If you do that, you're setting yourself up for frustration, anxiety, self-doubt, and failure. Okay, do not do that. I cannot emphasize that tip enough. Why is that? Here, I wrote this down. I want to share this with you. The problem with doing multiple choice questions before you are ready is that if you see wrong information, you will remember wrong information. Let me give you an example. If I ask you, what color is the sky? And the options are yellow, red, blue, green. Yellow, red, blue, green. Well, obviously you know blue, but then when you go back and you're taking your exam, you're like, I know it's blue, but I saw yellow somewhere and I saw green and if I go to Arizona, there's some red and yellow during the sun. What did I see before? And it starts sticking with you. Now, that's a very simplified example, but you get my point. When things get a little more complicated, that's going to come up. You're going to remember seeing those things that are not the answer. You only want to see correct information. You only want to see the option blue. That's it. You don't want to be taking your exam and be like, why did I see yellow? I knew there was a point. Was this a trick question? Did I learn something that says I should circle it? You don't want to put yourself in that position. But if you learn your vocabulary first, you've learned by memorizing the correct information, and you're only seeing those options after you're confident with everything. And that's the key point. If you know sky, blue, done, I'm confident, you're not getting caught up with rationalizing that wrong information. So you must memorize that vocabulary first so that when you're unsure and you're not confident in your knowledge, you're not taking in wrong information and rationalizing. I can't emphasize that enough. If you memorize your vocabulary first, when you take on those questions, you're going to be banging them out like it's nothing. Boom, 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 boom. Because one of the keys I also tell people to passing, and here's my next tip, you never want to circle wrong information on the exam, so stop learning irrelevant information in the textbooks. So one of my next tips is don't overanalyze and don't take in wrong information. I should say wrong information, but it's not the right word. Information that's not directly relevant to you passing. When you memorize your vocabulary, it doesn't happen. When you do multiple choice questions, that absolutely happens. Let's check out our next note here we got for you guys. This is a good one. So I'm going to continue talking a little about this vocabulary memorization bit that I think is so important. And when I say memorize, I don't mean don't learn it. Sometimes the easiest way to memorize something is to understand the context. Okay? So if you can understand it, do that. It'll make it easier to memorize. So when I say memorize, I don't just mean rattling off words like it's Greek. If you don't have time, that's what you got to do, so be it. But that's not ideal. When you try and memorize vocabulary words, I want you guys to try and write them in. On the PrepAgent program, Arthur built in a magnificent program where you could type in the words. And if you don't have that, so be it. Get a piece of paper and write them in. But my tip is to be active in your learning. Don't just stare at it and hope it just magically sinks into your head. Writing it makes you focus. Writing the words down makes you focus on what you're doing. Keeping your attention on things is vital when you're trying to study. This information is not very exciting, so it's very easy to lose focus. But if you're writing the information down, then that'll keep your attention on the task at hand, okay? So write it down. So just have the words, write it down. I said 10 words before. My next tip is to try and memorize 10 words at a time. 10 words at a time. In other words, have 10 words listed, be able to fill in the definition of those 10 words super easy, and once you can do that, move on. If you can't fill in the definition of those 10 words, don't take on an 11th word. Memorize those 10 words before you do anything else. Do everything in small blocks. After a while, those blocks will become bigger. 10 will become 20, 20 will become 30, and so down the line. But first, take everything on in blocks of 10, and when you have it all accomplished, then maybe you could do blocks of 20 as it becomes easier, to the point where it's all easy and you could just bang through the whole thing and write it all out. When you do that, then it's time to do those questions. Okay, let me look at my next tip I have written down for you guys. So we said the best way to do this is try and write it in with vocabulary words 10 at a time. It's what I just spoke about. Here's a good one. Do what is easiest first. Okay, take on the easiest content first and work your way through it. Many people fail because they get scared by something that's very hard, whether it's a math problem or maybe it's a finance concept, something that looks very scary to them. So what do? They spend a massive amount of time on the concept that's very difficult, where honestly, they may not even get it right anyway. And what happens during that time? They ignore all the information that they just spent 1 minute on. They would have known, boom, real property movable, personal property movable, boom, boom. But they never took the time to do that because they spent their whole day looking at this one concept that took up all their energy, made them sad, made them depressed, kind of was a massive buzzkill for them for their studying, and they never got around to the easier stuff. Remember, everything's graded equally. Things aren't weighted more difficult or less difficult. So what I want you guys to do is organize the information so you're taking on the easy stuff first and progressively work towards the harder information. Remember I spoke to you about what you're doing at night? Well, maybe allocate an evening to organizing the information into easy, medium, hard. Easy, medium, hard. Because let's be honest, if you get let's break it up into thirds. Let's just do thirds. If you nail down all the easy information, that's a third for you. The medium information, you only know half of. And the hard information, it might as well be Greek to you. You'll probably pass. Because if you just guess on all that information you don't know by just sheer numbers, it is multiple choice. If you get 1 out of 4 of those correct, combined with that easy information you knew really well, you're going to get a passing grade. It's that old adage of know what you know and don't kind of know everything. I think there's that expression, a jack of all is an expert of none. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Don't kind of know everything. Really know some stuff, and the rest of it you got to guess, you will pass. Okay? So organize your information. Obviously, if you take a class, you're going to go through all the information, or maybe you're watching webinars with me, or whatever it is, but there's many type of videos, classes, things you're going to go through, where as you're listening, you can make notes. Oh, that's really hard. I'm going to put it here. Oh, that's super easy. Let me make sure I know that before I do anything else. So there's many different ways you can kind of organize that information. Said one way to do it is as you're hearing it for the first time, you know what's easy for you and what's not. Organize it into those 3 categories. Okay, moving right along. We said do not take on the more difficult information until you have the easier information 100% nailed down. This is a great point. I want to bring this up with you guys. Another reason I want you to learn the easy information first, because the rest of the information will build off of that concept. Okay? If you spend all day learning something really difficult and it doesn't make sense, it's not going to be a building block towards more information. For example, if you understand real property is immovable and you really understand it and understand the ins and outs and nuances that applies to leases, mineral rights, contracts, not just movable, immovable, but everything related to it, understand what a fixture becomes easier, understand what a trade fixture becomes easier, understand the concept of severance becomes easier, understand the concept of pertinence becomes easier. It's a building block. That's the other reason you got to know that easy information super well. Because remember I said guessing on that later information? Guessing will become a lot easier for your foundation. But if you just know everything kind of well, it doesn't relate to each other. It doesn't build up the greater understanding, and therefore you're more likely to struggle. Okay? So that's the other reason I wanted to share with you guys why you want to nail down that easy information first and not waste all your time. It drives me nuts when people say, oh, I'm so scared of math. And they spend their whole time studying math for those few questions on math, and they still don't fully get math. And and they say, well, I failed because of the math. Well, maybe you failed because of the math, or maybe because you didn't spend time on the other 95% of the information that was on the exam that you could have learned super easily if you just gave it the attention it deserved. But instead, you just spent all your time on what was scaring you, appealing to your fears, rather than playing to your points of confidence. That drives me crazy. Don't do that, okay? People tend to study, let me share this. People tend to study towards their fears rather than to their points of confidence. And that's crazy. I use that analogy in basketball when I talk about shooting a hoop. When you play basketball, what do? If you guys play sports, you tend to focus on your strengths. You don't say, well, that's what's scaring me the most, so I'm just going to keep going towards that and keep going on that again and again and again. No, what a coach does is, what are you good at? I'm going to make you really, really good at what you're good at, rather than spending a ton of time on what you're terrible at, and therefore you're not going to succeed because you're going to be mediocre at everything. Instead, I'm going to take where you're strong and make you super strong in that, and you're going to have a role. On the exam, it's the same thing. If you're super strong in one area, the other stuff you're weaker on, yeah, you're going to have to guess. But if you're super strong in a certain area, well, that could be enough to get you past the exam. Can't be good at everything, right? Okay, move on to the next concept. Okay, there are many tools available to create a better understanding. You guys got video, books, audio, Google. People always forget to Google stuff. My next tip is don't avoid Google. People always ask me questions. Joe, what's this concept? What's that concept? You know what I do for them? I Google it, and I send them the link, and then they're like, oh, thank you for explaining that. And I'm like, okay, couldn't Google it yourself? So don't be afraid to use Google. A lot of great information's there, and do a little research yourself. But with that being said, if you want context, there's video, books. We do some great webinars at PrepAgent every day. You guys can participate in that. Utilize the information that's around you. Here's an interesting one I wanted to share with you guys. So I mentioned morning and night. Some of you guys want to study all through the day, and that's fine. But if you do that, I want you to look up something called the Pomodoro effect. The Pomodoro effect, or the Pomodoro technique, I should say. The Pomodoro technique was a technique developed by, let me look up the guy's name, Francisco Cirillo. I hope I pronounced that correct. The Pomodoro techniques help you resist all of those self-interpretations and retrain your brain to focus. Each Pomodoro is dedicated to one task, and each break is a chance to rest and bring your attention back to what you should be working on. In case you guys don't know, Pomodoro is Italian for tomato. You're like, what's the relevance of tomato? Well, the guy had a tomato that was also a timer, and he would set it for 25 minutes. At the end of the 25 minutes, he would take a 5-minute break. During that 5-minute break, he would get up, rest, jog, sing, juggle, do some yoga, whatever it was. But the point was, it was designated where he would study for 25 minutes, not get distracted by anything. If a distraction came, wrote it down and put it to the side so he could look at it later. But at the end of 25 minutes, whether he liked it or not, he stopped for 5 minutes. And each 25 minutes, he called it a Pomodoro. It had to do with the tomato and the timer and, I don't know, whatever works. But that's a great technique. After 4 Pomodoros, 4 25-minute sessions, he would take a longer break. I think it was like a 30-minute session break, but you could look that up. Point is, it's a great technique to stay focused and be more efficient so you don't just zone out. You're kind of training yourself, you know what? 25 minutes, I'm going to stay honed in on what I'm doing. Then I'm going to take a 5-minute break. Whether I like it or not, there's going to be a 5-minute break. Because the problem is, if you keep going, you don't take that break, then eventually you're going to doze off or wander off. And they found that your attention span weans off quicker rather than you take 25 minutes, 5-minute break, 25 minutes, 5-minute break. You will see your study ability will go much longer by using those intervals of those breaks. So that's a tip I wanted to share with you guys called the Pomodoro technique. If you guys need to study throughout the day and are really trying to fit in a lot of information in a short period of time. All right, guys, so those are my tips and tricks for studying for the real estate exam. I got a lot of information about what's on the real estate exam, and I explained the content on the exam pretty well, I think, if you look at our YouTube channel. And on PrepAgent.com, there's a ton of content for you guys. We got the webinars, we got flashcards, vocabulary quizzes, we got tutoring, we got some great tutors, a whole bunch of stuff. But as for tips and tricks for studying for the real estate exam, I hope you enjoyed that. And this is Joe from PrepAgent, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.